Our math warm-up today involves multiplying fractions. So I'd like you to take out your dry erase board or a sheet of paper, number it from 1 to 4. Go ahead and pause your video and complete these 4 if you would, please. All right, our first answer would be 6/15. Our second answer would be 12/35. Our third answer would be 40/18, which we could then turn into 2 and 4/18. And our last one would be 9/16. How'd you do? Our math message today involves a term that maybe you have heard or not in the past, but it is the term natural measures. When we talk about natural measures, we're talking about measures based on the human body before rulers and scales were common. So I want you to think about your student math journal. Which natural measure would you use to measure the width of your math journal? So think about that for a moment. And something that you could use to reference that would be page 212 in your student reference book if you wanted to look at natural measures in more detail. And once you've decided which natural measure you would use, I want you to think about the question down here at the bottom. Why do we use standard units now? Since most body sizes and shapes differ a great deal, natural measures were only general reference points that people used for lengths and widths. And the reason that we now use standard units is because it is something that is the same for everything. So such as inches or kilograms, it would be the same. It's not going to differ like the human body does when we try to measure something. So our lesson today is all about collecting and using fractional data. The reason we're doing this lesson today is we need to be able to model with mathematics in real-world situations, and we need to become precise in our expressions, and of course we're talking mathematically. How we're going to go about that is we're going to use personal measures to create line plots using fractional data, and then we're going to answer questions based on data collected in the line plot. To get started today, we are going to talk about fathoms, cubits, spans, and joints. And if you didn't use your student reference journal earlier, or a reference book, you might not have looked up these personal measures, but this is a grouping of those personal measurements, and they're also at the top of your student math journal, page 258, if you want to go ahead and open that up because you're going to need it. So the first thing that you are going to do today is you are going to measure your fathom to the nearest inch. So your fathom is going to be from the longest tip of your hand on one side to the other tip of your finger on the other side. So you may need some help in getting these measurements if you can't quite do this by yourself. A tape measure would probably be the easiest, but if you don't have that, a yardstick, or you can try to use a ruler several different times, but that's going to be a little bit more difficult. The second personal measure that you are going to make today is the cubit. And we're going to measure that to the nearest 1/2 inch. So the cubit is going to be the distance from your elbow to the very top of your tallest finger. So this would be the cubit. And over here we had this distance here was our fathom. And now we're going to move to what we call the great span, which is going to be measured to the nearest 1/4 of an inch. And that is the distance between the end of your thumb to your pinky with your hand spread out. So that's going to be your great span. And then last but not least, we're going to measure a joint to the nearest 1/8 of an inch. So notice they are looking at their second finger and they are measuring from this joint to this joint. So the distance there to the nearest 1/8 of an inch. So you will need to measure each of those personal body measurements, and you're going to record that data in your student math journal on page 258 underneath each one of those personal measurements. Then you're going to take that information and you're going to put it in a line plot at the bottom of that page. So I have included some data for you to place in your line plot once you have measured your own personal fathom, cubit, span, and joint. So what you'll do is take the 6 data points that I have for each one of those personal measures, add yours to that, and then plot them in your line plot. So we're going to practice here a little bit with some measurements that I have here on this screen that are the finger stretch length. And I just have some numbers here that we're going to go ahead and put into a line plot. So remember, our line plot is labeled with our numbers down here at the bottom in some kind of number line, depending on what your smallest data point is to your largest data point, and usually it's labeled with some words and some kind of unit. And then a lot of times we'll have a title up at the top for the whole line plot itself. But let's go ahead and plot the numbers that we have here on the left. And so the first number that I see is a 4, so I'm going to place an X here. I'm going to cross that out. Then I've got a 6, 6, 4 1/2, 4 once again, 5, 5, 6, 6 1/2, 7, 6 1/2, 4, 5 1/2, 4 1/2, and 4 1/2. Okay, so once we have placed our data into the line plot, hopefully you were noticing as I did that I tried to keep my rows somewhat level there so we can see where those X's line up. However, that one's a little bit off. So if I were really picky, I would probably scoot that up to line up with that third row. And looking at this data set, now I can answer questions about it. So if I were asked what was the smallest finger stretch length, we would say it was 4 inches. And if I asked what was the largest, we would say 7 inches. If we asked how many people had a finger stretch length between 5 and 6, so here's my 5, here's my 6, I would then count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people fell into that category. Or if we were to ask the question, which one had the most? Well, we have 3 numbers that have the most, right? We had a 4, 4 1/2, and 6 all had 3 people. Some other questions that might be asked might be, you know, what is the total number of inches, right? So we would add each of these data points all together, right? And we could come up with an average if it asked us that by dividing by the number of data points that we have. So you will be creating line plot based on your natural body measures and then placing those into a line plot and answering questions about the data. So to summarize this lesson, natural measures were used in the past before rulers and scales were common, and we can use these measures to collect data, plot, and answer questions regarding the data set. See you in class.